Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Navigating Flow Errors as a New Administrator. In today's session, I will go over the best ways to handle when your flows run into an error, as well as tips to be prepared for future errors, thereby reducing their occurrences, reducing flow downtime, and in turn, reducing user frustration. Now, first off, I want to thank all of you for attending this or watching this on demand. Really means a whole lot to me that you're taking the time out of your day to do so. Who am I? I am David Simpson. I am a Salesforce administrator at the 1916 company. I have been an admin for the past 9 years, and I have been a Flownatic for the past 6, and of course, dealing with flow errors for those past 6 years as well. Here's what you can expect to learn in today's session. You'll be able to configure standard Salesforce tools to proactively identify and track flow errors for faster resolution. You'll be able to troubleshoot complex flow logic using the Flow Debug tool to minimize that downtime and ensure system reliability. And last, but certainly not least, you'll be able to architect flows with built-in error handling best practices to scale your automation with trust and governance. So first thing we need to do is we need to know when these flow errors are occurring. And the best way that we can do that is with Apex exception emails. Now, when you are set up to receive Apex exception emails, you are going to get notified every single time one of your flows or Apexes run into an error. And these things are a wealth of information. They'll tell you exactly which flow went wrong and the error message that they received. You'll also know who ran into the flow error, how long the flow ran for, as well as every single step that the flow took. Now up here on the screen on the right-hand side, we have an example Apex error email, and it's a wall of text, so don't try to read all of it. But the thing that I want to call out is up at the very top. So we can see the flow error name. It is opportunity fulfill order. That's the flow that had the issue. And then in that green text box is the actual error message. So it says something about a validation exception. So now I know that I'm going to have to look into validation rules for figuring out what exactly went wrong. Now, setting up Apex exception emails is incredibly simple. All you have to do is go to Apex exception email in Salesforce Setup, and then add yourself as a Salesforce user. Once you do that, any future flow error will go to the email address on file on your Salesforce user. Now that's all well and good, but I want to call out this email addresses not in Salesforce section. It might be a little bit hard to see, but there is a Slack domain there. So what's all that about? Well, the email addresses not in Salesforce section can send Apex exception emails to external email addresses, such as a distribution list, or maybe somebody who's outside the company. My personal favorite use case for the email addresses not in Salesforce is to send to a Slack channel. That way, if a flow runs into an error, I can work with my team collaboratively through Slack to get it fixed faster. Now, you may be wondering how you can set this up. Most of it is done inside of Slack, so let's go over the steps. So you'll go into Slack, you'll either create a channel, or you'll find an existing channel, and you'll click on the header name so you can open up the settings, and you'll go to integrations. In the integration section, there will be the send emails to this conversation button. And if you give that a click, the first time you do it, it'll ask you if you want to generate an email, and you'll say yes, of course. And then you'll get this lovely email address. It's a long string of alphanumeric characters followed by your domain. You're then going to copy that email address, and you're going to put it into the Apex exception emails not in Salesforce section. That way, every future flow error will go into Slack. And here's what that looks like. So here, that opportunity fulfill order flow that we looked at a few moments ago is now in Slack in a channel. Me and my teammates have received this as a Slack notification. So I'm going to ping my coworker and let him know that I'm looking into this issue. I'm going to be reaching out to that sales rep and tell them exactly what went wrong and what they can do to fix it. So we've got a collaborative aspect to flows, because if we can handle it with other people, we'll get it solved a lot faster. Now, what if you're not subscribed to Apex exception emails, or perhaps you subscribed a little late and you want to see some historical flow errors? Well, enter the paused and failed flow interview section in Salesforce Setup. This gives you a recent list of flows that have run into issues, and very similarly to those Apex exception emails, it gives you key data points for those flow errors. So the flow that ran into the issue, who ran into it, and the error message. What's also great about paused and failed flow interviews is that you can actually see exactly what went wrong by clicking on the flow interview itself to see an error log. So let's take a look at an example. Here is the paused and failed flow interview screen in our Salesforce instance. And as you can see, we've had a couple of flow errors, but I'm really interested in this top one, this create event flow error. It looks like the error message is related to a required field being missing. So I want to dive into that a bit. And I can do that by clicking that interview label in the top left. So that create event, March 20th, 2026, that's a link. When I give that a click, this opens up the flow error log. And this shows me every single step that the flow took before it ran into the issue. I can see flow elements inputs and outputs. I can even see decision elements and see which paths they went down. And then, of course, I can actually click on the element that ran into the issue, and I can see the error message itself. So in this example, we can see that some decisions were triggered. We can see that a couple of assignment elements went through the process. And then down at this create person account element, we ran into an issue. And if I look at that bright red text box down in the bottom left, I can see that the error message says that a required field is missing. This person account is missing a last name. So now I have a general idea. I need to update my flow to make sure that a last name is always present when trying to create a person account. So this is just a great tool to really narrow down what you need to do and fix it faster. So we have identified these flow errors. Now it's time to start troubleshooting and seeing what's wrong and deploying a fix. Now, for the rest of this session, I'm going to be talking about troubleshooting, testing, and building. And I need to stress this should all be done inside of a sandbox. Our users may be running into these issues in production, but we don't want to accidentally affect real-world data. So please try to replicate these errors in your sandbox, build a fix there, and deploy it to production. Just standard best practices when it comes to flow or any builds. So when it comes to flow errors, they tend to happen on data elements or flow action elements. So these are your create records, your update records, maybe a send email or an Apex action. They can sometimes happen on assignments or decisions or screens, but they tend to be pretty rare with that. So keeping that in mind, you want to focus on those elements for the most part. And when you're looking over a flow that ran into an error, check the following. Of course, check the error message. It might be very straightforward. It might tell you exactly what you're missing or what you need to fix. Sometimes it's a little bit more cryptic. And we'll go over a couple of those cryptic error messages in just a moment. Look at the flow element where the error occurred. That gives you some great context into what you might need to do. If it's something like create or update records, it might be permissions-based. But if it's something like send email, maybe you're missing a key input that you need to fix. Look at the running user. If this flow is erroring for everybody, it's probably not permissions-based. It's probably something with the architecture of the flow. But if it's a single user or a single subset of users, perhaps it is permissions-based. And then, of course, if applicable, look at the Salesforce object where the error occurred. Again, that might be validation rules, might be field level security, might be permissions. These elements just all help you narrow down exactly what you need to do to fix your flow and get it up and running faster. So I had mentioned that there are some pretty cryptic flow error messages. And to be honest, there's dozens upon dozens of flow error codes out there. These 6 just happen to be the ones that our company run into the most often, and I just wanted to touch on a few of them here. So field custom validation exception. This normally means that your flow is trying to take action on a record, such as creating or updating, but it's running into a validation rule and getting stopped. So maybe what you need to do is make sure your flow is in compliance with that validation rule. Fill out certain fields. Maybe if the flow can't be in compliance, you skip that step entirely. And in rare occasions, maybe you have to update the validation rule and may be outdated. Insufficient access or read-only. This means that the user who ran into the issue doesn't have the necessary level of permissions, but it tends to be due to sharing settings. Maybe they can create an update accounts, but they can't create and update that particular account. So maybe we need to look at the sharing settings, see if we need to grant the access, or maybe, again, we need to tell them that they can't make a change to that specific record. Cannot insert, update, activate entity, which totally rolls off the tongue and is easy to say. The running user doesn't have permission to edit the record also, but this time it is more so permissions-based, such as object level access and field level access. So maybe we do want to give them access to those specific fields, or similar to the insufficient access or read-only, we just tell them that they can't update that specific record. Maybe they don't have the access to change those key critical fields. Now again, there's dozens upon dozens of flow error codes, and these are just a few that we run into. So your best tool when trying to troubleshoot a flow is the flow debug button. This thing is awesome. It allows you to test your flow without activating it. A few years ago, you used to not be able to do this. You'd have to activate your flow, go find a test record, play around with it, hope the flow worked as intended. If it didn't, go back, make a new version of the flow, repeat until you finally get it fixed. But now, we can just hit this button, enter a couple of inputs, and see if our flow runs as intended. And if it doesn't, fix it. We can also set parameters with the flow debug. We can set input variables if there are any. If it's a record-triggered flow, we can also set the record and its fields if we're doing updates. We can set the running user to see if it is permissions-based, or if we just want to run it as ourselves, we can just make sure that the flow is running in a system administrator context. We also have rollback settings. Rollback settings are a great tool because the flow will undo anything it does when it runs through the debug. So if you have a flow that makes 24 task records and you don't want to inundate your sandbox, hit that rollback button. So at the end of the flow, those task records will be removed. Here's an example flow debug, and you'll notice that it does look pretty similar to that flow error log, but we have control over determining whether or not it's going to run into an issue. So for some context, this is an auto-launched flow. It creates task records based off of a related parent record. And on the left-hand side, I have entered in some input variables, so essentially just text strings to provide to the flow. Below that are the debug options, and I want to call out two particular checkboxes here. First, I have unchecked Run Automation as another user. This is mainly going to be run by system administrators, so I'm not too worried about permissions here. If I was, I could check that and then select a specific user. I also checked the Run Automation in rollback mode. So like I said, this makes a bunch of task records. I don't want to get reminders in my sandbox org in a couple of days for all these tests. So I hit this checkbox. All the task records will be removed at the end of this process. Now, off screen of the screenshot is the Run Debug button. I'll give that a click, and we get the screen on the right-hand side. So we get this kind of bold blue line showing every single element that was interacted with during the flow debug process. And on the left-hand toolbar side, we can see the inputs, the outputs, and of course, the decision elements and what steps it took. So we can see here that this checked the parent record. It looked at one of my input variables and decided to go down the account tool. So we have identified our flow errors. We have troubleshooted our flow errors and hopefully deployed a fix to production for these flow errors, and our users are back on their merry way completing their tasks. Now it's time to start thinking about the future. How can we proactively build and proactively test our flows to reduce the number of flow errors that occur or narrow down exactly what errors it might be? So we'll start with some proactive flow building best practices, and I have two main best practices in mind here. The first best practice is built-in validation in your Salesforce flows. And this is not so much like a validation rule that you would put on an object, but rather utilizing decision elements or conditional visibility. So maybe we're checking for missing fields, and we're telling the user to fill those out before proceeding. Maybe we are checking to see if records already exist and stopping them from creating another one. So we have these options here that we can take an alternative set of flow actions to avoid issues in the first place. And also, we can utilize these to prevent bad data. So maybe they are updating an account record, and we want to make sure that they have a phone number or email address. We can build in those validations into our flow. I have two examples I want to show here for the built-in validation. The first one is conditional visibility. So we love our screen flows here at the 1916 company. This is a screen flow to send an email to a customer, and this screen here is the email composer. And we send this to a person account email address. Now, in order for this to work, we need an email address to be present. So what we do is we have this to email address field, but it's only conditionally visible if the person account's email address is blank. And if it is blank, this field will show up and is required. So the user cannot proceed until they enter in that data. If the email address is already there, they don't even see this field. It doesn't clutter up their space. So this helps us out to ensure that we have clean data, but also, if we hit that send email action, it's not going to error out because there's no missing email address or no email recipient. Second example here is a decision element. So for context on this one, we utilize cases to process returns. Returns are tied to opportunities. And we can only ever have one open return case on an opportunity at a given time. So very early on in this screen flow, we check to see if there are any open case records for the given opportunity. And then we use a decision element to see if a record was found. If a record was found, we navigate to the left-hand side, and we provide this custom error message that ends the flow. Tells them that there is an open case, Here are the case details. You need to go take care of this before you can process a return. This stops bad data so we don't have duplicate cases, but it also happens early enough in the flow process that we're not having them enter in a bunch of case information or return information, and then suddenly they get stopped. They're told right off the bat, you need to go address this before you can do the return. So it saves them time, it reduces some of the frustration, and keeps our data clean. The second aspect of proactive flow building is implementing fault paths into your flow. So what fault paths do is they take an alternative set of actions in your flow if it actually runs into an error. So maybe you are trying to create an account record and it fails to do so. Instead of getting that terrible unhandled fault exception occurred, it takes a separate path. Maybe you send an email to system administrators. Maybe you provide a custom error message that says, hey, we ran into an issue with your account. We let your admins know they're going to be reaching out. There are some considerations when utilizing fault paths. First off, a fault path, if a flow runs into an error and runs down that fault path, will no longer show on the paused and failed flow interview screen. This is because, technically speaking, it did run as intended. It just took an alternative set of steps. And to that point, you're not going to receive an Apex exception email. So if you do still want to be notified of faults, you're going to want to add a step in your fault path to send an email. What we like to do is we like to have a subflow that calls onto a public group of system administrators and then provides details about that flow specifically. So let's take a look at one of those. This is, again, another screen flow that creates an account record. And if we were to run into any issues with that account record, we have this red dotted line fault path that the flow takes. First off, it undoes any pending transactions in the flow, so we're not having bad data. It calls on that subflow that I had just mentioned, so it's an email to a public group of system admins, provides the flow ID, the flow name, the flow error message, and the user, so kind of similar to that Apex exception email. And then we have a custom error screen. Instead of saying unhandled fault exception occurred and then it has that cryptic Salesforce flow error that our user can't do anything with, we say, hey, we ran into an issue creating your account. We let your admins know. They're going to be reaching out to you shortly to help fix this issue. So that way they have a clear line of resolution, and they may be frustrated in the moment that they couldn't complete their process, but they know that it's going to be fixed by us. So we've done some proactive flow building. It's time to proactively flow test. We can't cover 100% of scenarios of what might happen to our flows or what errors might occur, but we can adopt a consistent process to reduce the number of potential errors. So that way, if it does run into an issue, we can probably fix it faster because it's only going to be a smaller subset of issues. And the best way to go about this is to be thorough in your testing. I know it takes more time in the development process, but it pays over time. You want to use that debug button early and often. Even if you're nowhere near completing your flow and you only have a couple of elements, hit that debug button. See if it runs as intended so far. You might have missed a field and get an error message, and you'll be able to fix it right there before you have a massive flow built out. Use that debug button to test as different users. Of course, test it as yourself, make sure it actually works, but also test it as the users who will most likely run into the flow and use it in their day-to-day. We want to make sure that they have the permissions and access necessary to go through the flow without issue. On an alternative set of steps that you could do for testing, try to break your flow. Enter in bad or incomplete data intentionally. Test as a user who doesn't have a sufficient level of access. See what happens in the flow. Can they complete it? Is the data clean? Is it not? Make adjustments to your flow accordingly based off of that bad data. Also, it's a good idea to adopt a quality assurance process. Define your acceptance criteria before you start testing your flow. What does the definition of working look like? If it's a screen flow to make a case, does it make a case? Are the necessary fields there? Document your test steps taken and the scenarios covered. This way, if your flow does run into an issue down the road, you can already rule out the test scenarios that you covered and focus on other potential causes. If you're fortunate enough to work with other Salesforce team members, have them test the flows before deploying, or even have power users test your flows in a sandbox before deploying. They might go through it a slightly different way and find something that you had not thought about. So in conclusion, your flows may break, but you have the tools to fix quickly and keep your organization running smoothly. I want to thank you all so much again for attending or watching this. It really means a whole lot to me. If you enjoyed the session or have any feedback, please fill out the survey on the Salesforce Events app. There's a slight chance there might still be a Starbucks gift card in for you. No guarantees. And if you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn or YouTube or the Trailblazer profile, you can scan that QR code. I will also be available for a few minutes on the side of the stage to answer any questions. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.